gentleman put you on film as a whistleblower. Do you remember him doing that? It's on YouTube now.
Oh, are we talking
NASA.
about way back in? That would have been about 2000 and 2002 or so. Back when Contact in the Desert used to be held way out in the desert, way east of Los Angeles. Are you talking about that far back or a little bit more recent than that?
Well, I believe, was it Stanley Kubrick that did the movie or whatever, Faking the Landing?
Thank you.
And so
there you go.
It was?
Yeah.
Okay. So Stanley Kubrick was the name I was looking for, I believe. He directed. Okay, so are you looking? I was looking to see, somebody grilled you about, he may have been from UK, but the fact that, was that fake?
And they say, you didn't really go to the moon, and I go, and I get a real kick out of it because people are going to say, well, that was just a big fake. You didn't go to the moon, et cetera, and everything else. I say, okay, well, I have a question for you. Have you seen some of the pictures coming from the satellites around the moon? Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, have you seen where they photographed the landing spots for the Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17? They can actually zoom in and find the descent stage still sitting there on the moon? Well, yeah. I said, then how did we get the descent stage landing there if we didn't go to the moon? And that usually sets them up. So we have proof. Go ahead. What was that?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
We have orbital satellites that are orbiting the moon now. And in fact, the Chinese sent one up recently, or a few years back.
Right.
And you're right. The high definition photos that the Chinese have made, you can actually look at it. You can see the legs of the limb left behind on the moon. And it's real small, but you can still see that it's there. And so the physical proof is there that we went to the moon. It's indisputable.
And before somebody hears you say the legs, let's go back and say, no, the complete descent stage, because it was a complete. It was the engine that fired that slowed them down and helped them actually land on the moon. Then when it was time for us to lift off and rendezvous with the command module, we used the descent stage, which also had all of the rovers and had all the equipment and everything in it for the moving for our going around on the moon and doing setting up all the samples and everything else. So then once we fired the ascent stage, we left the descent stage on the lunar surface and then went into lunar orbit and rendezvoused with the command module and then made our transition back to the planet Earth. So if you say just the legs, I'd afraid people think, oh, well, there's a bunch of legs laying around on the lunar surface. But no, it was the whole complete descent stage. They
had to leave a lot of stuff there because they couldn't take those. Like you say, the rovers, they couldn't take those back with them. That was far too much weight. But so yes, a lot of that stuff was left. And we can see
a lot of people.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say.
I was just. Go ahead. We'll get it right in a minute,
we had
folks.
An astronaut. We had an astronaut get into trouble because he kept the his camera that normally would mount on the front of the spacesuit while he was on the lunar surface, and this was come on and help me on the guy's name. It was Apollo 17. He was the commander, and he had his own his whole program where everybody would contact on him, and now he's passed away. Doggone it. Edgar Mitchell. There you go. Edgar Mitchell. Right. He got into trouble because he didn't. One of the things they had to do is to lighten up the weight of the ascent stage of the lunar module so that they could do the rendezvous on the command module. So things that weren't needed anymore, such as the cameras and a lot of the other equipment and extra things that they took to the moon, those were thrown out the front door, if you want to call it that, the front hatch, onto the lunar surface to lighten the weight, because then we had all the weight of the lunar samples that we were bringing back. So, Edgar Mitchell got in a great deal of trouble, and they tried the 16-millimeter camera that was used to film the final descent stage and landing, and then out through the main window of the lunar module pilot, which is the right-hand side when you're looking forward inside the limb. But that's in now in what Edgar Mitchell did is he instead of keeping it. He had it put with Smithsonian, and it is now part of the stuff that's at Smithsonian. So it's sometimes dangerous when you start going against the plan, and now we look back and see all of the stuff that was going on behind our backs. No wonder that they were a little concerned that we might give too much information out, that people would then start questioning, did we really go? And then you've got the film that Kubrick had to do. We were concerned about being able to land on the moon and be ahead of Russia because of the Cold War going on, and so Kubrick was asked to create a landing on the moon and the time on the moon, and then on the way coming back, there would have been a disaster, and the guys would have perished on the way coming back. We would have won the race.
Well, they were doing a mock-up. Do you remember? You remember the word mock-up? And I think it was Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong that was checking around, but they had the film for mock-up and for testing, and they used that for photos and things. There was a lot of reasons they did that. And I guess Stanley Kubrick was chosen to help.
Okay.
But, we had, what do you think? What's your inside? Now, you were in the developing, tell people what you did. So you had the film, and he was an aerospace engineer, went through a whole bunch of equipment with the suits and all of that, and his brother worked there at NASA. You'd had to have been there to see, there was a lot of kind of training things, but God, I remember so much that when they would be testing, and remember all the patches. There was a different patch for everything. But I think the Stanley Kubrick thing and mock-ups, and folks, we had all kind of mock-ups for everything you can imagine on the Apollos. There was Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. 6 of the missions that achieved the goal, but 7 and 9, they were orbiting missions to test the command and lunar modules. 17 and 13.
I was actually the test director. I was actually the test director for the TM5, which was primarily the descent stage over in building, I'll probably get it wrong, 14 I think it is, at NASA and the Johnston Space Center. And my job was to have the descent stage configured for each mission, and starting off with the first one with Apollo 11, and I had Neil and Buzz, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, in their spacesuits, coming out from down the ladder and simulating what it would be like on the lunar surface, and going around how we could set up all the ALSUP, that's the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Package equipment, and so that's how we trained them to be able to set up the seismograph equipment, and as well as the photographing just about everything going on outside of the lunar module sitting on Eagle. So I was the test director of that, and so that kind of put me right in the middle of everything. And I did that for Apollo 11, and wait a minute, I have to correct that. I did help the training on the Apollo 12, but then as soon as we landed on the moon, I was on vacation while we were headed to the moon, and when I got back right after Apollo 11 had landed on the moon, I went into the office and I said, "Okay, well, what are we going to do next?" And he says, "I hate to tell you, but while you were gone, we're no longer doing research and development. We're doing routine flights to the moon. So your position has been canceled." So I was without a job, and the next day I went over to the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. I became the director of the lunar sample information. Yeah, I was in charge of all of this, not the samples, but where they were shipped to, and all of the documents and all of the samples that were brought back. I was right there with all of it, so I had direct contact with them. We get into a little bit more of what I did, unless, TJ, you want me to tell them how we wound up being able to keep some of the information out there to the rest of the world?
Sure.
I can go into that.
Sure, because the open walk is going to be about... Yeah, go ahead. Is that okay with you, Bill? The open walk.
Yeah, go
Let
ahead.
him share some information.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Well, they're at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory and Data and Photo Control Department. That was where I was the director of that, and I had from the photo lab, I had copies. I had 5 complete sets of every mission, and all of the 16 millimeters and the 70 millimeter Hasselblad pictures, as well as all of the communications from mission control to the astronauts while they're in flight, as well as being there. So I had control of that material in my data and total control department in my filing cabinets, and then I got the direction says, is it okay to say the people's names or not, TJ, even if they've passed on? I don't know.
If they
Somebody
passed,
tell me, please.
I guess, we all have our own life story, and if you lived it,
Yeah.
that people want to know. Bill, how do you feel on the open walk? Just go ahead and say it, right? I mean, his story.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Okay.
That's fun.
Well, now, go ahead. I'm listening. Okay.
Hey,
Well, I'll go ahead with it anyway. Yeah. We had the contractor that was in charge of the laboratories at the Lunar Seeding Laboratory. We had, we were not actual NASA employees. We were contractors. And Bud Lascala, who was my supervisor in the management of that, and he came in and says, "Okay, Ken, get rid of all but one set." And I go, "Wait a minute, I've got 5 sets of everything." He says, "No, get rid of it. We don't need them. We just need one." And I said, "We have government. We have universities and places, and it's paid for with our government." With our tax money that came from everybody. I said, we can use these universities could use them. He says, get rid of everything. And then here's the key that I use. He says, I don't care what you do, but get rid of all but one set. And that was what I used as my authorization. I took, of my 5 sets, I took 3 sets and I dumped them in the back of the Lunar Seeding Laboratory in the density dumpsters and had them just dumped in there. Later on, there was a woman who did discover and find a bunch of those and saved a bunch of pictures. But those were dumped there. That left me with 2. So I kept one for the filing on this so that visitors could go through and pull up certain pictures, original pictures that hadn't been photoshopped, because we didn't have photoshopping back in those days. So those were still available. And that 5th set, because it said, I don't care what you do, just get rid of them, I put in a duffel bag and fix them all up, and that night when I had to work overtime, I put them in my truck, my car, and I took them home and I put them in the closet for several years, quite a few years before. Well, actually, no, it went a lot longer than that. Excuse me. That would have been in. So we landed on the moon in 1969. That would have been in 1972. 72. And whenever I saved those, and then by 1980, whenever things wound down, and I wound up leaving the whole space program and went to work for the Boeing company as a Boeing 737 flight instructor. I still had all of these things, and I had to keep things safe. I was lucky to find a big double door safe, a big, hard safe that you can't get into. And I'm going to hit this real fast. A guy by the name of Richard C. Hoagland, which was talking about not on the moon, but in Mars and the face on Mars and those things. He was giving a talk in Seattle, Washington, where Boeing is, and there was a group of us at Boeing. We called ourselves the Majestic 12 too, and we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have emails and things like that. We had to have the actual documents. We put them in inter-office mailing envelopes, and those would then go to the different people. So this little group of us, we kept in touch with each other, and every time we'd hear something new, we'd send each other the little messages. And the guys told me, he says, this Richard Hoagland's going to be in Seattle, and he's giving a talk. You ought to get in there. And I wasn't teaching a flight crew that night, so I wrote out a little letter of introduction and said that, who I was, that I'd been the data photo control director, et cetera. And I had an archive that I'd kept, that whole series, that archive, if you want to call it that. And I went to the meeting, and I went in to check in, and the woman there, I was getting ready, I said, give this to Mr. Hoagland. And she looked at my letter of introduction that I wrote, and she just started shaking up. She said, you're who we've been looking for. And I'm thinking, secret clearance, I am in trouble. He came out, and just before they started the program, had me go in and sit down and listen to the whole program. And then they came to my house the next day, and I pulled open the big safe and pulled everything out, and they were amazed because they had been looking at generation after generation after generation of photos and pictures. It was kind of hard to be able to see what was there. And when they were looking at the first generation pictures, they were going wild about what some of the bases and things that we're looking at on those. So that's kind of like where I wound up with coming forward even with the clearance and the